I still remember the sound of the rain tapping against my bedroom window the morning my mother died. I was only 8, but some memories are etched so deeply into your mind that they don't fade. It was the day the world split into two, before and after. My father's hand trembled as he held mine in the hospital waiting room, his eyes rimmed with a redness I had never seen before. I had clung to him that day and every day since, as if letting go would mean falling into the same void that had swallowed my mother. Now, almost a decade later, the void was still there, though quieter. I'd grown used to its hum, the way grief doesn't leave but becomes a quiet companion. But through it all, my father never let me drift too far. He was my anchor, the one constant in a world that kept shifting beneath my feet. I'm 17 now, days away from my 18th birthday, and the thought fills me with a strange mix of excitement and dread. There's something about turning 18 that feels monumental, as if the world is suddenly waiting for you to make decisions you aren't ready for. But my father, as always, is a step ahead of me, easing me into the idea with his usual gentleness. "Are you sure you're not too old for surprises?" he teased one night as we sat on the couch, a blanket draped over both our legs. I smiled at him, the warm glow of the TV flickering against his face. His dark hair was starting to show flecks of silver at the temples, but his eyes, the ones I had inherited, were as kind as ever. "I'll never be too old for surprises," I said, resting my head on his shoulder. The next morning, the smell of pancakes lured me out of bed, and I found him in the kitchen, humming to himself as he flipped another golden round onto the stack. He always made pancakes when something was on his mind, and as I poured myself a glass of orange juice, I wondered what he wasn't saying. "Big plans today?" he asked, sliding a plate in front of me. "Just school," I replied, "and maybe some last-minute birthday shopping." He raised an eyebrow, his signature dad move that always made me laugh. "You don't need to buy anything. You'll see." "What does that mean?" I asked, narrowing my eyes at him playfully. He grinned, a boyish look that made him seem younger. "Just trust me." I did. I always had. As the week went on, I found myself anticipating the surprise more than I'd anticipated anything in a long time. It wasn't just about the gift. I knew that whatever my father had planned, it wasn't going to be something you could wrap in paper and tie with a bow. It would be something thoughtful, something that reminded me of the bond we shared, the one that had carried us through the darkest of days. The night before my birthday, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, the glow of the street lamp outside casting soft shadows on my ceiling, and thought about how much had changed. I wasn't the little girl who needed her father to hold her hand through the night anymore, but in some ways, I still leaned on him just as much. A knock on my door startled me, and I sat up just as my father peeked his head inside. "Still awake?" he asked, stepping into the room. I nodded, pulling the blanket around me. "Just thinking." He sat on the edge of my bed, his familiar presence comforting. "You excited?" "Yeah," I said, though the word felt too simple to convey everything swirling inside me. "But also a little scared." He smiled, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. "That's normal. 18's a big deal, but you don't have to have everything figured out right away." "I know." I hesitated before adding, "I'm glad you're here." His gaze softened, and for a moment, we sat in the kind of silence only the closest of bonds could create. Then he leaned over and kissed my forehead, the way he had when I was a child. "Good night, sweetheart. Tomorrow's going to be special." And it was. When I woke up, the house smelled like vanilla and cinnamon, and there was a note taped to my door. "Come outside when you're ready." I dressed quickly, my heart racing with anticipation, and made my way to the backyard. There, under a canopy of twinkling fairy lights, was a table set for two. My favorite breakfast pastries were arranged on plates, and a vase of sunflowers, my mom's favorite, stood in the center. "Dad," I whispered, overwhelmed by the effort he had put into this. He emerged from the side of the house, carrying a tray of fresh fruit and coffee. "Happy birthday," he said, setting it down before pulling me into a hug. I hugged him back tightly, breathing in the scent of him, soap, coffee, and something uniquely my dad. "This is perfect," I said, tears stinging my eyes. As we sat down, I couldn't help but marvel at how much he had done for me over the years. My father wasn't just my parent. He was my best friend, my confidant, the person who understood me in ways no one else could. And today, as we laughed and ate and shared stories about my mother, I realized that turning 18 wasn't just about me, it was about us. About how far we had come and how much farther we could go. After breakfast, he handed me a small box. One more surprise. Inside was a locket, simple and gold, with a photo of my mother on one side and a picture of the three of us on the other. My breath hitched, and I looked up at him, unable to speak. "I thought you might want something to carry with you," he said softly. I nodded, tears slipping down my cheeks. "Thank you." As I fastened the locket around my neck, I felt the weight of it settle against my chest. Warm, comforting, and filled with memories. It wasn't just a gift. It was a reminder that no matter where life took me, I'd always have a piece of my family close to my heart. And as the sun rose higher in the sky, I knew that this was the best birthday I could have ever asked for. The evening felt different from the moment the sun dipped behind the horizon. Shadows stretched across the walls of our home, and the familiar glow of the dim kitchen lights flickered as I walked downstairs. My father stood by the counter, pouring himself a glass of water, but he didn't look like the dad I saw every day in his worn-out work shirts or casual joggers. He was dressed in a fitted black button-up, the sleeves rolled neatly to show just the hint of his forearms. His black pants hugged his frame perfectly, and a subtle hint of cologne lingered in the air as I entered the room. I paused at the doorway, taking him in as if seeing him for the first time. My father had always been handsome, but tonight, something about him seemed sharper, refined in a way I wasn't used to. His hair was neatly combed back, the strands catching the soft light, and the way he moved, confident but relaxed, left me quietly impressed. For a second, I almost forgot to breathe. He noticed me standing there and smiled warmly, the kind of smile that always made me feel safe. But tonight, that same smile sent an unexpected flutter through my chest. "There you are," he said, his voice softer than usual. "I was just about to come find you." "You look different," I said, trying to keep my voice casual, though I was sure he could see the surprise in my eyes. "Is that a good thing?" he teased, raising an eyebrow. I nodded quickly, laughing to hide my awkwardness. "It's a good thing. You look great, actually." He set down his glass and leaned slightly against the counter. "I thought we could do something special tonight. There's this new restaurant in town I've been meaning to try. What do you think? Would you like to join me for dinner?" I blinked, a little caught off guard. We hadn't gone out together like this in a while. Not since my birthday dinners when I was younger. "Really? Just the two of us?" He smiled again, this time with a hint of something softer, something nostalgic. "Yeah, just us. But only if you don't mind." "I'd love that," I replied, excitement bubbling up inside me. "But give me a little time. I want to get ready." He chuckled as he walked past me, the scent of his cologne trailing behind. "Take your time. I'll be waiting." Upstairs, my heart raced as I rummaged through my closet. I wasn't sure why, but I wanted to look perfect tonight, to surprise him the way he had surprised me. I pulled out a deep red dress, the one I hadn't worn since last year's holiday party, and slipped into it. The fabric hugged my body in just the right places, the neckline dipping slightly but tastefully. I paired it with heels and took a moment to curl my hair, letting the waves fall gently over my shoulders. When I looked at myself in the mirror, I felt a rush of confidence. This wasn't how I normally presented myself around my dad. I wondered what he'd think. As I dabbed on some light perfume and added a touch of lipstick, a playful idea popped into my head. When I returned downstairs, he was waiting by the door, scrolling through his phone. But as soon as he heard my heels click against the floor, he looked up and froze. His eyes widened slightly, his gaze sweeping over me in a way that made warmth spread through my chest. "Wow," he said under his breath, straightening up as if to compose himself. "You look stunning." I felt my cheeks heat up, but I grinned anyway. "Thanks. I thought I'd surprise you." "You definitely did," he replied, still watching me. I don't think I've ever seen you wear that dress. First time, I said, smoothing down the fabric. You look really good tonight too, by the way. That shirt suits you. He gave a soft laugh, his hand rubbing the back of his neck like he was suddenly shy. Well, I guess we're both pulling out all the stops tonight. Before he opened the door, I turned to him with a mischievous smile. Hey, I have an idea. He tilted his head curiously. What's that? Let's call each other by our first names tonight, I suggested. You know, to make it feel more special. He raised an eyebrow but nodded, clearly amused. All right, Anna, he said, my name rolling off his tongue in a way that made my heart skip. But only if you call me Mark. Deal, I said, biting my lip to hide my grin. The restaurant was dimly lit, the ambience elegant but intimate. Soft jazz music played in the background, and the faint clinking of silverware filled the air. As we were seated at a small corner table by the window, I couldn't help but notice the way other diners glanced at us. Some probably assumed we were a couple on a date, not father and daughter, and the thought sent a strange thrill through me. Mark pulled out my chair, helping me sit down like a true gentleman, and I smiled up at him as he settled into the seat across from me. You've got good manners tonight, I teased. He smirked, resting his elbows on the table. Only the best for you. We ordered our meals, and as the evening unfolded, the conversation flowed effortlessly. We talked about everything. My plans for college, his latest project at work, and even memories of my mother. But there was a lightness to it, as if tonight wasn't about mourning the past but celebrating the present. You've really grown into an incredible woman, Anna, he said at one point, his gaze lingering on me longer than usual. I'm so proud of you. The sincerity in his voice made my throat tighten, and I reached across the table to squeeze his hand. Thanks, Mark, I whispered, the name still feeling foreign but intimate. I couldn't have done it without you. He smiled, his thumb brushing lightly over my knuckles. I don't know how I got so lucky. The rest of the evening was filled with stolen glances and soft compliments, moments where his eyes would meet mine across the table, making me feel like the most important person in the room. By the time dessert arrived, I had lost track of time, too caught up in the warmth of his presence. On the drive home, I stared out the window, my mind swirling with everything that had happened that night. I had spent so many years thinking of him as my protector, my rock, but tonight, he had shown me a different side of himself, one that was playful, charming, and unexpectedly captivating. As we pulled into the driveway, I turned to him, unable to hide my smile. Thank you for tonight. It was perfect. He leaned over, brushing a strand of hair from my face in a gesture so gentle it made my breath hitch. Anytime, Anna. You deserve it. And as I stepped out of the car, my heart still racing, I couldn't help but wonder what the rest of this new chapter would hold. When we returned home, the house was bathed in the warm, familiar glow of the living room lamp. The night was quiet, save for the faint hum of the heater kicking on, and I kicked off my heels by the door, sighing as my feet touched the cool wooden floor. That was fun, I said softly, more to myself than to Mark, as I hung my coat on the hook by the entryway. It was, Mark agreed, his deep voice sending a gentle warmth through me. It's been a while since we've done something like that. I nodded, thinking back to how effortless the evening had felt. I hadn't thought about school stress, about responsibilities, or even about the empty space in my life where my mother's presence used to be. Tonight had been just us, and it felt like we had created our own little world, separate from everything else. Mark walked into the living room and sank into the couch with a contented sigh, leaning his head back against the cushions. I followed him, but before I could make my way upstairs to change out of my dress, he looked over at me with that familiar mischievous smile I'd seen throughout the night. I don't feel like sleeping yet, he said. How about a game? A game? I echoed, curious. He shifted, sitting up and resting his elbows on his knees. Yeah, a game of wish fulfillment. We take turns making small wishes, and the other person has to grant them, no questions asked. I blinked, the idea catching me off guard. That's a little risky, don't you think? I teased, though a part of me was intrigued. Only if you're afraid of what I might wish for, he said, his eyes glinting with playful challenge. I laughed, the sound bubbling out before I could stop it. All right, you're on. But no outrageous wishes, okay? Of course, he agreed, leaning back against the cushions with a satisfied grin. Ladies first. I thought for a moment, tapping my chin dramatically as if I were making the most important decision of my life. Okay. I wish for you to make me a cup of hot chocolate. He chuckled, shaking his head. That's too easy, but I'll allow it. He stood, ruffling my hair lightly as he passed by me on his way to the kitchen. 1 cup of hot chocolate, coming right up. I smiled as I watched him disappear around the corner, the warmth of his playful touch lingering. This was what I loved most about him, how he could turn the simplest moments into something special. While he busied himself in the kitchen, I curled up on the couch, pulling a throw blanket over my legs. The faint sound of him humming a tune under his breath floated through the air, and I found myself feeling more at home in that moment than I had in a long time. When he returned, he handed me a steaming mug topped with a generous swirl of whipped cream. 1 wish granted, he said, settling back beside me on the couch. Thank you, I murmured, taking a sip and savoring the rich, creamy sweetness. Your turn. He rubbed his chin thoughtfully, as if weighing his options. I wish for a hug. I blinked, surprised at how simple and sincere the request was. But there was something in his gaze, something soft and genuine, that made my heart flutter. Setting the mug on the coffee table, I scooted closer to him and wrapped my arms around his waist, resting my head against his shoulder. His arms encircled me, warm and protective, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. His heartbeat thumped steadily beneath my ear, and I closed my eyes, letting myself relax in his embrace. You give good hugs, he murmured, his voice low and soothing. I smiled against his shoulder. You make it easy. We stayed like that longer than I expected, the weight of his arms grounding me in a way I didn't realize I needed. Eventually, I pulled back slightly, just enough to meet his gaze. His eyes held mine, and for a second, the air between us felt heavier, like the room had drawn in a breath it wasn't ready to release. Okay, I said, clearing my throat and forcing a grin to break the tension. Your wish is granted. My turn. He nodded, though his eyes lingered on me for a moment longer. Go ahead. I wish for a compliment, I said playfully, leaning back against the cushions. But a good one, not just something you'd say to be polite. He chuckled, shaking his head as if I'd given him a challenge. Oh, that's easy, he said, leaning forward slightly. Anna, you're one of the most beautiful people I know, inside and out. And I'm not just talking about your looks, though. Yeah, you've definitely grown into someone stunning. But it's the way you carry yourself, the way you care for others, and the way you make people feel like they matter. You make me proud every day. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly tight. His words didn't feel rehearsed or casual, they felt like truths he had been waiting to say. My cheeks warmed, and I tucked a strand of hair behind my ear to hide how flustered I was. That was more than I expected. He smiled gently. You asked for a good one, didn't you? I laughed softly, shaking my head. Okay, fine. You win. For the next hour, we continued the game, exchanging wishes that ranged from the silly, like making each other do impressions of our favorite movie characters, to the heartfelt, like sharing memories from when I was a little girl. But with each wish granted, I felt us drawing closer, the boundaries that once defined our relationship quietly dissolving. At one point, he reached over and tucked a loose curl behind my ear, his fingertips grazing my cheek in a way that made my breath hitch. You're amazing, Anna, he said softly, almost as if he didn't mean to say it aloud. I looked at him, my heart racing, and for a moment, the world outside the walls of our home didn't exist. It was just him and me, tangled in a warmth that felt both familiar and new. I wanted to say something, anything to break the spell, but my voice refused to cooperate. Instead, I leaned in slightly, resting my head against his shoulder again, hoping he couldn't hear the rapid thumping of my heart. His arm wrapped around me instinctively, pulling me closer, and I let myself melt into the comfort of his touch. Good night, Anna, he whispered after a while, his lips brushing the top of my head. Good night, Mark, I replied, my eyes drifting shut. And as the quiet hum of the house lulled me to sleep, I knew that tonight had changed something between us. What that change meant, I wasn't entirely sure. But for now, wrapped in his warmth, I was content to let the night carry me wherever it wanted.